I'm Gil Contreras, and welcome to the Gil Contreras program. I'm a former police officer, U.S. Army veteran, and radio and podcast host. On today's show, we'll be talking with retired LA County Sheriff's Homicide Bureau Detective Lieutenant Gil Carrillo, who, along with his partner, Detective Frank Salerno, helped to put one of the most prolific serial killers, Richard Ramirez, on death row. In a moment, Detective Gil Carrillo. Gil Carrillo, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I first have to say that you are a celebrity now. You're trending on Netflix. You are part of the focus of this new Netflix documentary that dropped on about the 13th, I think, about 2 weeks ago now. And you and your partner Salerno are featured prominently in this thing to talk about the case itself, how you investigated it, how you tracked this guy down, and then how ultimately he was taken into custody, convicted, and sent to death row. So how does it feel to be a Latino from the east side of Los Angeles trending on Netflix? Let's start there.
You know, I have no idea. It means a lot more to my family, my younger kids. You know, they're in their 40s, 3 of them. And they're so excited. They're the ones that come up and tell me, Dad, it's trending number 1. Dad, it's trending. And come to find out for the first few days, excuse me, it was trending number 1 in the nation, number 6 in the world.
That's amazing. And just amazing.
Since I don't follow, you know, everything on Netflix and social media and all that, I didn't know what it meant. But I've received literally, as a result of this Netflix documentary, literally hundreds of requests from Facebook from all around the world.
Wow. And so what are people, is it from just people who have watched the documentary, or is it academia? Is it other law enforcement agencies? Who's trying to get to you, and what do they want?
It's everything from professors from Hungary, from Spain, from Argentina.
Wow.
Somebody from Ireland wants to do a Zoom Zoomcast with me, to professionals that are asking me to speak at colleges, from other colleagues, conferences, asking me to speak at conferences. Mm-hmm. And I used to do that when I was working. I traveled all around the U.S. speaking at major universities and law enforcement, but I haven't done so in years. Now it's all of a sudden from all over the world. I don't know what word to use. I wasn't prepared for it in my wildest imagination that I think this thing was going to be as popular as it came out to be.
Yeah, you know, I thought the Richard Ramirez story was had been done to death, right? You know, there's been 100 documentaries and movies of the week and specials, and you know, I've probably seen most of them. And you know, I happened to be on Facebook and I saw an ad for it from Netflix. And the thing that caught my attention was the number one, the eerie music, but the scenes of you and Salerno in an unmarked vehicle driving through the city at night alone. You know, for anybody who's ever pushed a police car around the city or a county, there comes an hour where there's only cops and crooks on the street. And it's kind of an eerie feeling. It's kind of a edgy feeling. And that was the feeling I got when I saw the commercial. So I get home and I tell my wife, well, we're gonna watch this thing. I saw the ad on Netflix. And we watched one episode. I ended up watching all 4 in one night. I just binge watched the whole thing because I just couldn't tear myself away. I wanted to see the next segment. So how did they get you and Salerno to agree to be on the show and be such a huge part of the story? Because mostly cops don't like media, and they're kind of standoffish with media.
It all started out probably about a little over 2 years ago. A personal friend of mine, I was friends with his whole family, and his uncle was a very dear friend of mine, was a sergeant on the sheriff's department. Mm-hmm. This kid was a deputy, got injured and got retired early on. He became a writer, and he was writing for the program Chicago PD.
Okay.
And he called me up one night and said, Gil, I'd like to have a meeting with you. You know, myself and a co-writer over here. He said, a lot of TV stuff on, but there's nothing with Hispanic lead roles or anything like that, so we'd just like to talk to you for a bit and see what kind of ideas we can kick around. I went out and had dinner with him, Next day, he called me back and said, "Hey, the guy really loved you. He loves your character. He think you're a great person." I said, "Okay, thanks a lot. Hey, made a new friend, got a free steak dinner. I don't care." Because I really, over the years, especially because of the Ramirez case, I've had dozens of people wanting to do stuff, and we've turned them down. No, I'm not interested. This guy said, "I want to think of something." Well, a year goes by, and he calls me back. The friend, Mr. Tim Walsh, and he says, "Hey, I'd like to take you out to dinner. Want you to meet a friend of mine." That's where I met Tiller Russell, the director of this thing.
Okay.
And it was an instant bond with the both of them. Really, they had me sold. Mr. Russell's just a down-to-earth guy. I felt an instant connection with him. And he said, "I can see a story here, and I want to do it. Would you do it?" And I said, "Certainly. I'll go along with this." And he said, "What about Mr. Salerno? You think you can get him on board?" And I said, "You get him on board." So next thing I know, Frank's agreed. And then, I tell everybody, certainly we were the subjects of the interviews that they were conducting, but it was Mr. Tiller and his whole staff that put this thing together. It was very compelling. I had no idea what he was doing, which way it was going to come out. He mentioned one time, "Well, I'm thinking about it." I said, "Hold up. You guys are the gurus. You know the business. I don't. I'm just subject to your interviews." And so they put the storyboards out, and they did it. I watched it for the first time the night that it was released.
Okay.
And I hadn't seen anything other than the trailer that they released a couple of weeks before.
Right.
And so I watched it, and it brought tears to my eyes. It was reliving some of the stuff. And I thought it was certainly well done. It just so compelling. And I actually learned from it. I had to apologize to my wife. I was sorry. I was so focused on catching the killer because not only was he killing innocent people out there, he was a danger to the entire county of Los Angeles. And my family lives in the county of Los Angeles, so it was dangerous to them.
Right.
So I was focused on doing everything I could possibly do that. And it was kind of like, okay, my job is to catch the bad guy. Your job is to take care of the kids in the house. She's a homemaker. She's never worked. She's a stay-at-home mom. So that was her job. And I didn't want to hear about broken pipes. I didn't want to hear about the kids. And when I watched this, I realized for the first time how much pressure she was under. Yeah. And it was sad. So I had to apologize to her.
Well, the interviews that I saw in the documentary were just some of the most compelling interviews that I've ever seen. And you and Salerno, the level of honesty that you guys brought to it was just, I've never seen anything like that. And the cinematography, the way they put it together, it's not surprising to me that this thing is trending so high on social media.
I don't know. I know everything they asked and everything we talked about was the truth. It wasn't. I'm not an actor. At one point, one of the photographers said, "Do you think you can get a tear?" And I said, "Let's get one thing straight. I'm a cop. I'm not an actor, so no." And I'll be darned if I didn't think of something. I was supposed to. They had that shot glass in front of me, and I was supposed to just take a sip of it.
Right.
And we did. I said, "Do you mind if I just raise a shot glass up in the air?" As if I was just cheering somebody. And they said, "No." So I did it. I raised it up in the air. And I looked up, thought of something, put it back down. And after everything was over, and that scene didn't come out. And the photographer came up and said, "Can I say something personal?" And I said, "Certainly." He says, "What were you thinking about when you raised the glass?" I said, "I was thanking my mom and my dad for making me what I am today." And that got a tear, as it does right now. I was thanking them. And She said, it showed. And you said you couldn't make a tear. So, and they didn't use that, but it did. So everything was very sincere.
Right. And I want to stick with that for a moment because aside from the investigation, the cop side of you and I have very similar backgrounds. I was raised on the east side of the city, which is fake East LA, not in the county. But I'm an Army veteran. You're an Army veteran. And coming from Latino families, working class Latino families, family and those relationships with our parents are they're critical to us. And see, now I'm tearing up because my dad, who was an 82nd Airborne Ranger paratrooper, passed away 3 years ago now. And everything that I do, there was a time when my mom said to me, you have done a lot of the things your dad wanted to do. You were a cop, you do a radio show, you've done a bunch of stuff. You won a Golden Mike. Your father is so proud of you. And, talk about that, your family. How did you come up? You grew up on the east side of Los Angeles. What was your family life like? Because in the documentary, you say you came from the streets. You were out in the calles. And I wasn't on the streets because I wasn't allowed to. But talk about that for a bit.
Well, in my home, it was a very traditional Mexican home. Dad was the labor man, and Mom was in charge of the kids. Mm-hmm. I had 6 sisters, no brothers. And so I'd get away with anything with Mom because I was her consentido. I was her spoiled one, and she'd let me have everything. But on the block, I couldn't do anything with my sisters because I remember black and white TV, and so we'd have to divide. Okay, everybody gets a half hour, pick what they want. And they'd watch their shows. It's my turn. I'd put on sports, and then they'd start screaming at my mom that, hey, nobody wants to watch this, only Gil, and so I'd lose out. So I wouldn't hang with my sister. I'd go down to the corner and hang with the fellas. Uh-huh. And that's where I was raised, on the streets and in a barbershop. Originally starting out in the front of the barbershop and then graduated to the back room. So I learned the streets. I wasn't going to graduate from high school. I was failing English. And I was going to be the first one in my family not to graduate. Mm-hmm. And I remember the teacher told me, you write a term paper, make it good, and I'll let you pass. So there was one cop from the sheriff's department used to come down our block, shake us down, do everything, but he was cool. Mm-hmm. And he says, man, you guys can't hang around like this. You guys can't do this and do that. And if I can ever help you, I will. And so I went up to him and I said, hey, I got to write a paper. I want to write it on cops. Will you help me out? And so he said, all right. So he helped me write a little bit. And then he took me home and talked to my parents. At the age of 17, told them, sign for this boy to get off the streets or he's going to end up dead or in prison. And so they did. And for the most part, the guys from the block that went into the military are productive citizens, and those that didn't are either dead or in prison. Wow. So that's what started me off. And then once I got in at 17, I turned 18 November 29th, and then 2 months later I'm in Vietnam. And that gave me a new appreciation on life, matured me. I had goals and dreams now. I wanted to come back. I had 3 goals in life. One was to become a cop and give back what was once given to me. Number 2, I wanted to go to college because when I was growing up, only white people, rich white people went to college, certainly not Mexicans. And number 3, I wanted to start dating my ex-girlfriend that wrote me a Dear John in Vietnam so I could get her back, eat it out of the palm of my hand, and break up with her. I wanted revenge. Wow. So everything worked out. Got out in June of 70. December 26th. By September, I had her eaten out of the palm of my hand. And then December 26th, day after Christmas, we got married.
Wow. Well, listen, we're going to take a short break. I'm speaking with retired LA County Sheriff's Homicide Bureau Detective Gil Carrillo. And when we come back, Gil, I want to talk about your military service, your service in Vietnam, and then we'll pick it up from there.
All right.
Back in a moment.
You could call him a real-life boogeyman, not as well known as, say, Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, yet still one of the most vicious serial killers in American history.
Today, the search for California's Night Stalker continues.
I'm afraid for everybody, elderly, young, everybody.
In the mid-'80s, the Night Stalker was more than a man. He was a collective nightmare, and when the police finally caught him, people wanted to know everything. He was an avowed Satanist whose crimes didn't just terrify communities, they made him this object of intrigue. So who was Richard Ramirez?
And we're back. I'm Gil Contreras. This is the Gil Contreras program, and I'm honored and privileged to be talking with retired detective Gil Carrillo from the LA County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau, who helped put Richard Ramirez onto death row. Gil, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking.
So listen, I want to pick up where we just left off. You joined your parents signed for you to join the military.
That's correct.
And so you went into the Army.
Went in the Army.
And what units were you with? Where did you serve? Where'd you go to basic? All that stuff.
Well, I went in under the Guaranteed Enlistment Program, so I had taken aptitude tests, and they thought I was good. They offered me 67 N20 was what it was classified as, single rotor turbine jet engine mechanic.
Okay.
So I went to Fort Ord for my basic training. From there, they sent me to Fort Eustis, Virginia. Halfway through basic training, I injured my knee. I had a cast on from my hip all the way down to my ankle.
Wow.
And I still went through basic. I did everything, including running and going on force marches. Mm-hmm. The only thing I couldn't do was squat and do knee bends. They allowed me to qualify. They said, no way will I qualify. And it just so happened my lieutenant in the company was on the Army rifle team. He said, you let me work with him and I'll get him qualified. And so he did. He taught me how to shoot, make circles when you get tired, when you're on the upswing, pull the trigger. So I passed. I got to graduate, got promoted out of boot camp, went to Eustis, Virginia for my advanced training, and from there went to this lovely country called Vietnam. Got there, it was an eye-opener. You know, this me who had never been out of the country like that, had never been on a plane, and all of a sudden I'm over here, and I got sent to the 189th Assault Helicopter Company. Mm-hmm. And so sent to the Central Highlands, Pleiku, Camp Holloway Air Base. And my first night there was first week of February. It was right at the beginning of the Tet Offensive. Mm. And so mortars and rockets started coming in on the air base, and I thought my world was over. You know, the guys there were used to it. I wasn't. I was scared to death.
You were the newbie.
I was the newbie, and by the time I got to the front door, low crawling against concrete, you know, they were standing there laughing at me, and they just looked at me and said, "Welcome to the Nam, kid."
Yeah.
And so I flew for my first, probably my first 6-7 months. I flew insertions. I was crew chief on a helicopter. Just like you sign for your gun when you come on the police department, I signed for that helicopter.
Wow. And
it was mine. So when it was up in the air, I was a crew chief telling them what to do, try to keep everybody safe, while the pilots flew us. They kept us alive.
Did their thing.
And when we're in a hot LZ, a hot landing zone, I'm a gunner. You know, I got the machine gun working, so did the gunner on the other side. So I did that, insertions, extractions, resupply, medevac, everything a helicopter could do, we did. Some ugly combat, come out of there, and finally, one day, you hear so much today about Agent Orange, but we were sent on a defoliation mission, had bladders of Agent Orange on our helicopter, and we're spraying rice paddies because they were using the rice paddies to feed the NVA and the locals. So we went in there to kill the rice, and it's the only time I actually saw Vietnamese jump up. And the Viet Cong, remember, he was all dressed in black, jumped up out of the rice paddies out of the dike, and my helicopter took about 3 hits before I was ready before I could react fast enough, return fire. I actually hit him, and I saw him go down. And as soon as you take fire, as what we call the slicks, these type of helicopters, you pull up and out and get out to safety. And then the gunships come back in, and they engage in combat. And I just decided that day, no, I'm tired of running. And so I transferred over to guns, and I flew the last 5 months. I flew Avenger gunships.
Wow. So Did or how, I guess, how did your experiences in combat affect how you would later do police work? Did it have an effect on you at all in terms of how you approach things on the streets?
Well, you're part of a team, just like you are on the streets. You're part of a team, and you are nothing without your partner or everybody else. It's definitively a team effort. As a result of this case, and the people are viewers, they're saying you're a hero, you're the greatest cop, you're this. No, I'm surrounded by heroes. I'm surrounded by everybody has their piece of the pie. We couldn't do anything without secretaries writing getting the reports ready for us. We're nothing without the crime lab. And my job as an investigator is sort of, I use the analogy like a conductor of an orchestra. The conductor may not know how to play every instrument, but he knows how, when they play together, what sound he's supposed to get. I don't know how to do all the exams or everything that's going on that everybody has a piece, but I know how to put them together and make a presentable case. It taught me that, if you panic, you lose. In combat, you panic, people die. Over here, you panic, you get too excited, you lose a case. And you can't. You have to remain calm, methodical, and do what you're given a task, do it to its completion.
Right. Now, in the documentary, longtime reporter for KTTV, Channel 11 here in LA, Tony Valdez, he speaks about you, and he said that, when he first saw you partnered with Salerno, that he remembered you as a patrol deputy out of East LA Station. So you were in patrol for 9 years before you ever got to Homicide, right?
I was in patrol from 1984 to 1981.
Okay.
So I was out there. Short glitch for a few months. I was actually transferred into headquarters gangs, but ended up back at patrol. And then I went March 23rd of 1981. I was transferred to Sheriff's Homicide Bureau.
So when you graduated from the academy, what was your first assignment? What did you first do?
When I graduated from the academy, the first assignment was Hall of Justice Jail, graveyards, early morning shift, Hall of Justice Jail.
Okay.
It's ugly. It's ugly. They had, down the bottom, they had great big rats, and they had cockroaches that were bigger than anything I've ever seen all around. It was an ugly place. Did 2.5 years in custody. Then I got transferred to East LA Patrol. Loved patrol. I loved the people. Not only my fellow deputies, they made sure they backed each other up. There was very minimal injury. Not too many people got hurt, and they were safe. I loved working with Latino people, giving them a ray of hope. You treat them good, and it's unfortunate in law enforcement that 90% of the people out there are good people.
Right.
10% are bad.
And they cause 90% of the problems.
Yes, law enforcement spend 90% of their time on 10% that are bad.
Right.
So anytime you can reach out to the good people and just let them, if it's nothing more than a smile, hello, good afternoon, it meant an awful lot to me.
Now, Tony Valdez said that he knew you as El Cucuy.
Yes.
Was that your street name, and
Yes.
how did you earn it?
I earned it one night while out on patrol. There was there was a guy that came back, transferred into patrol after being out of patrol for several years. He had been promoted. He was a sergeant. He actually took it upon himself, got permission to take off his stripes so he could, again, get knowledge of patrol work before he became a supervisor. And so he got a call one night of a prowler. It was around his apartment building, and there was great big bushes around the building. And so we just went to back him up, and I told my partner, I said, watch this. And I hid behind the bushes. When he came walking around, I jumped out at him. And when I jumped out, I jumped straight for his hands because I knew the first thing he would do would go for it. I jumped and I screamed, and he screamed. And he was a Hispanic, Richard Ramirez. And all he could say was, oh, God, I thought it was the Cucuy coming after me. And so he started calling me the Cucuy. Pretty soon the cops were calling me Cucuy. And before you knew it, the gangbangers on the streets were calling me Cucuy.
Wow, that's funny. That's a funny thing. So you get to Homicide Bureau, and you end up, how long did you work in Homicide before you got partnered with Salerno?
I got to Homicide March 23rd of 85, and the first time I worked with Salerno was, I got to Homicide March 23rd, 1981, and I got teamed up with Salerno in June of 85.
So, and he was a legend in his own right with regard to the Hillside Strangler case, right?
Yes, he was a legend when I got there. You know,
Talk about that for a moment.
I didn't even think that I'd be able to talk to the guy. You know, when I got to Homicide, I'm brand new, and I figured the guys up there were going to dump all over me because I hadn't paid my dues. I hadn't worked extensively in Detective Bureau, and it took an average of minimally 15 years to get up there, and I had less than 10. And so I was the kid, and I thought they were going to dump on me, and it was just the opposite. One guy pulled me aside and said, "You now represent Sheriff's Homicide, and we have a reputation. We have a vested interest in you. So you will be good. You will work hard, or we'll dump your booty out of here." And so we did. And I remember I'd been there 2 weeks when I was invited out to dinner with the team. They were going to go get some lunch at Little Joe's in Chinatown.
That's a famous cop spot.
Nice Italian restaurant. But, you know, I remember I'm a kid from the streets and from a Mexican family. I go in there and I looked at the menu. I didn't know I didn't know anything about anything on this menu. So I just ordered something that looked like had chicken and it had melted cheese on it.
Right.
And that's almost a good taco right there, you know. So I said, "Sure, I'll eat that." And as I'm eating, I remember laughing to myself. I was like a little kid. And I just started laughing, and Salerno said, "What are you laughing at, kid?" And I said, "Nothing, sir." And he says, "What are you laughing at?" I asked you. And I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm laughing at. 2 weeks ago, I'm eating a double-wrapped red chili burrito off the hood of a radio car from Lupe's." I said, "Today, I'm eating some shit that you got on a tail. I don't know what it is. Sitting here with Frank Salerno and the guys from Homicide, and I'm drinking a glass of wine. Doesn't get any better than this."
That's the big time.
Oh, it was.
That's the big time.
Big time. I was floating for at least a year when I got there.
So how long after you partnered with Salerno did you guys catch your first case that you guys tied to Ramirez, and that's the Okazaki case?
Salerno wasn't my partner then. I got Dale Okazaki March 17th of 85. Frank and I, the first case we won on was Patty Lane Higgins, was June the 28th of 1985.
Okay.
So Frank there for a while was my acting lieutenant. We weren't partners. I had caught the first murder of Okazaki with a guy named Jim Mercer. And then some of the other murders that occurred in between there, they weren't mine. Other investigators were getting them, some of them. And I just kept studying and reading, and I knew everything about those cases because I thought it was one guy doing it.
Now, so did you think that right from the beginning, right from the Okazaki case? Did
Shortly after the Okazaki case, because we did a drawing, a staff artist drawing, where the artist goes out there and just draws what you tell him to draw.
Right.
And it was right during the transition where, before that, they had identikits where they'd use the clear acetate to lay over.
Right.
They had an attempted kidnapping of a 12-year-old girl in Pico Rivera, and Maria Hernandez had done a staff artist rendition of the suspect she thought did this to her. And when I was showing this artist drawing over at East LA Station, which is close to where the case occurred, some guy came in there, Rene Galindo, who used to work that station, was now working late in Prince. He said, "Hey, hold that thought." And he came out and he showed me this identikit drawing that he had done recently. And they looked alike. And then you start looking at the physical descriptions, and they were matching. And then I started looking at some of the other stuff around there, and 1 and 1 were adding up to 2 and not 11. So it was...
So... in a moment, I want to talk about the one suspect theory. I want to talk about there was other crimes occurring in other jurisdictions, and you were meeting with other homicide detectives from other agencies, right? And I want to talk about how when you first broached them with this theory about one suspect hitting multiple jurisdictions, committing this wide range of crimes at each crime scene, which is kind of unheard of. But I want to talk about that in a moment. So we'll be back in a moment. I'm Gil Contreras. This is the Gil Contreras program. We'll be back.
Richard's cousin Mike came back from 2 tours in Vietnam. He was a war hero, and Richard idolized him. Mike liked to brag about everything he'd done overseas. He showed Richard the Polaroids he kept of at least 20 women he claimed to have raped and murdered. Mike also taught Richard what he learned as a soldier: stealth, precision, and combat. He wanted him to know how to fight and kill.
And we're back. I'm Gil Contreras, and we're speaking with retired Sheriff's Lieutenant from Homicide Bureau, Gil Carrillo. Gil, so you had these multiple crimes occurring in multiple jurisdictions. You had picked up a couple of cases, and you began to put this together as one suspect. What are the things that you saw? What are the commonalities that you observed, and how did you pick up on them?
It was first the knowledge given to me by a professor out of Cal State LA, Dr. Robert Morneau, retired FBI agent, and I took 2 semesters of advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes. And he pounded stuff in there about sex crimes that any reasonable sex crimes investigator should know. His were any reasonable and prudent sex crime investigator would know. Well, I saw things that weren't readily recognizable to everybody else. A noise that was made at the first, before he shot Maria Hernandez, an intentional noise. I mean, he could have walked up behind her and shot her, and he didn't. He wanted to be seen. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Dale Okazaki. He wanted to be seen. Silin Yu, he wanted to be seen. And there is a certain deviancy that causes arousal within a deviant that he gets thrills off of watching people frightened. And that's a sex crime. So I could see that. Their physical descriptions of what was going on. A footprint that was found both at adult murder scenes and at the scene of a child abduction. And that was the VIA footprint Model 440, where 1,356 pair of Model 440s entered the United States from Taiwan to New York for distribution throughout the U.S. 6 pair ended up in the state of California, 1 pair ended up in L.A.
That's amazing.
So that's a pretty tight piece of evidence when you start looking at, everything going on. So that's what drove me. Now, it was difficult, and I don't blame any cop, other than the ones that were calling me personal names, but I don't blame any cop that didn't believe me. Mm-hmm. One of my dear friends today, who actually, when my original training officer was off sick for a while, I asked to be put with this guy because he was good. Mm-hmm. And Sergeant Ray Verdugo, we're very close today still. Mm-hmm. And he confessed to me just a few months back that he was astonished. He really didn't believe that it was one guy doing all this stuff. And he remembered me talking about the kids. And he says he just couldn't buy it until towards the end when he realized, all the evidence that was coming in. And then certainly after the conviction and how we filed cases initially, and we dropped the Kitty cases before trial. Right. He said, you were right, and so, but I could understand because nobody in criminal history had ever been documented doing the things that we were alleging, that I was alleging.
Right. Time. So that's a thing that I find interesting is, so if the seasoned, long-time homicide detectives, if they're not seeing it, how does a guy brand new to homicide, how does that come together in your head? Why do you think that happened? Why did it come together like that for you?
Well, I tell you, the education given to me by Dr. Morneau and the ability to see it and notice it and say, there it is, and not give up on it. Those people, I could understand why they didn't believe. It hadn't been done. It hadn't been documented. When the FBI came out here to help us out for criminal profiling, they were quite honest and said, we've never heard anything like this. This is never done. A renowned psychologist out of New York and one out of UCLA said that we were essentially, I was full of hot air because one man wouldn't do this. You're not a pedophile and doing adults, boys, girls, old women, it just wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And yet I could see evidence, and I could see, if you don't have a closed mind about things, and eventually the theory that I was pushing came to be.
Turned out to be correct. I had a friend who's just retired, actually, at the beginning of 2020 from LAPD, 30-year veteran. He was a detective. And we were talking the other day through Facebook, and I said, hey, I'm going to be interviewing Gil Carrillo from the Night Stalker case. And he sent me a message back, and he goes, I saw the documentary, so I thought it was really good, but it made my department look like a bunch of buffoons. And then he said, but if the shoe fits, ... So
they were not, let me go officially on record right now, they were not buffoons. I mean, if a Dodger baseball player makes an error, the whole team isn't bad.
Right.
The individual is. They botched up a fingerprint on a car, got away with a stolen car.
Right.
That wasn't LAPD, that was an officer. There was a motor officer, and the motor officer didn't follow through like he should have. Mm-hmm. He made a mistake, that's all. Right. The second thing that made that documentary, and they mentioned LAPD, and LAPD shouldn't be blamed, the executive from the Sheriff's Department should have been blamed. And that is, we figured that Richard, we knew he was going to a dentist. Oh, we didn't know he was Richard. We knew our suspect was going to a dental office in Chinatown. We went to that dentist. The dentist describes his patient, and yes, it sounds like it's the right guy. And I got a copy of his x-rays, and I took him to a dentist friend of mine because it was hard to communicate with this dentist because of language communication. I took it to my buddy, and he said, this guy's going to need to, he'll be back in the dentist shortly. He's got an impacted tooth in there, and, he's got to go back. He's going to be in an awful lot of pain. So we put 2 members of the Sheriff's Department undercover inside that dental office, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were happy campers making money, working overtime, and it was all good. An executive from my department decided, you know what? That's a waste of time. We're not even sure it's the right guy. We don't know when he's going to come back. Pull those guys out of there. LAPD has a robbery box, and they did. They have a robbery. They can go ahead and hook up the machine inside. If Richard shows up, have him push the button, and they will respond immediately right here from Parker Center on the streets. He'll get there within minutes.
Right.
So we said, okay, we did it. They set the box up. First day the box is in. That evening I get a call from the dentist wanting to know what happened. How come we didn't go? He pushed the button. Nobody ever showed up.
Right.
And it wasn't LAPD. It was a malfunctioning button. Mm-hmm. That's all it was. So LAPD, we had a better working relation on this case with the investigators from robbery homicide than I had ever enjoyed. Mm-hmm. It was a pleasure working with them. And they should not be bad-mouthed. It made them look. Guys from my department been calling, are you kidding me? Why did they do it?
Right.
They didn't do anything wrong. It was a couple of individuals. That's all it was.
Right. But in the 80s, I do remember that, there was some animus between departments and, kind of rivalry between the Sheriff's Department and LAPD. And I remember down in the Harbor Division, some LAPD officers had stopped 2 deputies in an unmarked car and held them, and they did a whole video about that. And, eventually I'm going to put that link up on my website with this interview because it's pretty funny. It was a pretty funny incident. But there was that animus between law enforcement agencies at that time.
I worked during the 80s, and there was nothing more than friendly rivalry. In the 70s, Holland Beck and East LA Station had friendly rivalry. Mm-hmm. It was all done in fun. I don't think anybody took it seriously. In this case, with a case of this magnitude, we knew that there was going to be a lot of publicity, and we knew executives were going to be all over it. We sat down with our adversaries, our cohorts from LAPD, Leroy Orozco and Paul Tippin. And we said, okay, fellas, let's lay it all out on the table. We will hold absolutely nothing back, and we expect the same from you guys. We don't care who makes an arrest. We don't care who does what. Mm-hmm. We just need to work together to get this guy off the streets. We don't care about executives, and we're not going to go to executives about this. We're going to go in between each other, and that's what we did. And it was a great working relationship. The other stuff, it's all friendly, right? Just like baseball teams joking. You want to beat the guys, you want to be better, and you want to have bragging rights.
Right.
The day that Richard Ramirez was arrested, he was handcuffed by a deputy sheriff in a county area, and the guys, the blue meanies, the guys from LAPD had just crossed the line because they had been chasing telephone calls because he was jumping fences in the city, came over, didn't ask anything, just took him right out of the deputy's car, didn't take off the deputy's handcuffs, put him in their car and hauled him off to Hollenbeck. And when, in fact, the realities are he should have gone right to East LA Station and he had him in custody. And they didn't. The guys from East LA, the deputies, they were so angry, and they wanted to do funny things to that deputy to let the guy go. This is the biggest arrest in the county in history, and now you're letting it go. And all I did was laugh. And I said, hey, had it been you guys chasing him into the city, you'd have done the same thing.
Right.
Bottom line, the guy's in custody. We really don't care.
Right. We're talking with Gil Carrillo, who's a retired Sheriff's Homicide Bureau detective who worked on the Richard Ramirez Night Stalker case along with Detective Frank Salerno. Gil, I want to talk about the crimes for a moment. You know, just at the beginning of this segment, we heard the clip about Ramirez's uncle. Was it uncle or cousin, Mike, who was a Vietnam veteran and taught him these things about stealth, moving stealthily, and how to kill and all those things. I remember reading Phil Carrillo's book when it came out, and it was an eerie feeling to read. I used to read and write late at night when everybody's asleep. From 10 to 2 was my golden hour to do media stuff. And I remember reading this book during those hours, and after a while, I would like turn slowly and look at the sliding glass door, like I can't see who's. It's an eerie feeling because there was no pattern to his victim selection. And once he got into the house, he wasn't just burglarizing and murdering people. I mean, he was doing some really crazy things to people. And then doing things like actually having snacks and spending more time at a crime scene than what is normal. Talk about that for a moment, just how he selected victims, or I guess when you're investigating, since there was no pattern to his victim selection, that's probably what kind of threw off the task force as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, his only consistency was his inconsistency. He used firearms, he used hammers, he used blunt force trauma, ligature strangulation, knives, you name it, he did it. Victims varied, so it was varied, and it was difficult to follow him. Everything about him was difficult.
And I remember in the documentary, they kind of profiled this guy that you guys thought was the suspect. His name was Arturo Robles. And that was a kind of a funny story. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, I was actually at East LA Station walking through, and I was approached. I said, hey, we had a report. These girls reported that some guy was following them, and she's got a license plate number, got a description. So looked at it, and he had been following the girls around. We followed up, and I pulled a surveillance team in, and I said, okay, everything you can, learn about him, follow him, find him, and follow him. And he was working the City of Commerce, and then he went home that night, and they called me up, and they said, Gil, this ain't your guy. The guy has hair down to the middle of his back, and yeah, he's tall, he's light complected, but he's just a working guy. He came home. I said, okay, stay on him. And they were a little upset, but I made him stay on him. One of the descriptors we had was the guy used to wear a members-only type jacket. And so he came out of his house that evening, and he's dressed in all black, members-only type jacket, and he got his hair, and he stuffed it down the back of his jacket. And so he started following girls around that night, so we did a surveillance on him. Eventually, I ended up taking him into custody because he lost the surveillance a couple of days into it. And so we had to do something, so I arrested him, and we held a live line. And he just wasn't my freak. We did a search warrant on his house, and he had a lot of freaky stuff in there, but there was, as my old training officer told me, this guy may be a freak, but he's not your freak. So we just let him go.
I thought that was a great line in the documentary. He's a freak, He's just not your freak.
Just not your freak.
I'm Gil Contreras. We're talking with retired Sheriff's Homicide Detective Gil Carrillo, and we will be back in a moment.
Richard found a philosophy that fit his crimes. He started reading books by Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, then stole another car to attend one of LaVey's satanic ceremonies in San Francisco. Afterward, he called his mother, saying he'd been touched by Satan.
Welcome back. I'm talking with retired Sheriff's Homicide Detective Gil Carrillo. I'm Gil Contreras. Gil, what was the effect of Ramirez's interest in satanic worship? How did that affect the investigation? How did you find it within the victims?
It really didn't affect the investigation at all. When you stop and think about it, Satanism is just another form of religion. You know, nobody'd sit there and be less afraid if he was a Christian. You know, just Satanism, just like the name Stalker, Night Stalker, puts a little bit more fear in people, but I'm just looking for a human. Mm-hmm. I don't care what he's into. And we found a pentagram on one of our victims' legs, and then we know in the end down in Diamond Bar, he told us, well, one of our surviving victims, she said she swore to God she wouldn't call the cops. He said, don't swear to God, swear to Satan.
Right.
So we knew he was into it, but that didn't affect us at all. It affected me during an interview with him. Mm-hmm. For a millisecond. I had him. I was playing with his anxiety level, raising it up and raising it down. Yes, he's in custody, and I'm trying to formulate what questions I can ask, see what he's like. So I've got him, and at one point in time, I have him really riled up, and he's breathing heavy, and he had his head down on top of a desk with his fists clenched. He's laying there with his head, and he's sucking air. And I'm going, and he starts going. And for a millisecond, I'm looking at this guy, and I'm saying to myself, you know, I've been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been in fights. But if this man starts levitating off this desk, I'm out of here. I can't fight somebody floating around the room. And then I realized once again, no, he's just human.
He's just a guy.
That's all he is. And I said, hey, how would you like to take a break, get something to eat? And he was all for it.
That's funny. I want to talk about the media for a moment because they played a big role in this thing. And, you know, I guess if they were helpful, you know, I'd like to know, but mostly media is not helpful because they're not very accurate sometimes. In their rush to be first, they don't always get things right, has been my experience. But, you know, the media gave him a lot of names, like he was referred to as the Valley Intruder. Then he was known as the Walk-In Killer. And then finally the Herald Examiner called him the Night Stalker, and then that one kind of stuck with him. And wasn't the Golden State Killer, he was originally called the Night Stalker also.
I don't know. That Golden State Killer wasn't my case.
But I just thought it was weird that you know, they trying to find a name for these guys, and that's the one that stuck with Ramirez.
I found it always is the media that identifies these suspects. They come up with a name that catches everybody's attention. That's the one they stick with it. Very seldom, you know, I don't. At that time, they'd catch us and they say, "What do you call him?" So we call him suspect. You know, that's all. We didn't come up with a name. They're the ones that identified him.
Uh-huh. So tell me about, you know, the other news people featured prominently in the documentary is Laurel Erickson, and a producer over at KMBC4 in Los Angeles. Talk about your relationship with those guys and how, you know, how you were trying to conduct your investigation with them kind of following you guys around.
Okay, let me say this. Tony Valdez is a prince. Nice man. You can talk to him. He's good. We are still friends today. He calls me most of the time. He either says El Cucuy or he says Orale Carrillo, because one day in court, Richard Ramirez saw me and said Orale Carrillo, and everybody thought that was a death threat. It's just another way of saying hello, what's up, but only in street slang. And the only one that understood that was Tony Valdez, so it was kind of a joke between us. And he's still, to this day, we're still friends. Laurel Erickson, not so much. Laurel Erickson today is my friend. After this case was over, was my friend. We talked. I understood Laurel Erickson. Let me say this. She was good at what she did. And she threatened to go with the shoe print evidence, which was big.
Mm-hmm.
She threatened to go public with it. In my heart, I know, and I've spoken with Paul Skolnick since, and I said, she was never going to go with that. She wouldn't have done that. He says, you're absolutely right. She never would have. I said, but she knew how to use it to get an interview, because I talked to her back then, and she told me, you know, sometimes you have to bat your eyes, you have to play dumb blonde, you have to throw the tricks that she used to get a story. But she was good at what she did. She ultimately got what she wanted. And so today, we're still very good friends today. She was just good. And the press is doing what they want to do. And they, fortunately, because Salerno had the experience of working a high-profile case in the Hillside Strangler, he said, we're not going to waste our time running after stories from the media. We're not following them. They're going to have to follow us.
And you guys later found out that Ramirez himself was actually following his own press, right? He was following the media stories about him.
He followed the press. He knew who I was. He knew who Frank was the first time we walked in on him. Salerno, Carrillo, he knew who we were. We knew what name he liked. He liked the Stalker name. Down in Mission Viejo, he said, tell him it was me. Tell him the Stalker was here.
Wow.
And so we knew what he was doing, what he was watching. You know, he was a smart man. You know, he was a very articulate speaker too.
And at one point, as you guys are getting closer to getting Ramirez, Mayor Dianne Feinstein held a press conference in San Francisco because Ramirez went up there, right? He went up there and was capering up there, as well as Orange County and LA County. Talk about the press conference up there and Sheriff Sherm Block's response to it.
Well, we had just flown back in from San Francisco, and we were entering the building. At that time, our headquarters media section was right on the first level of the Hall of Justice, and they said, "Hey, Gil, Frank, you may as well come in here and look." And it was a press conference by Dianne Feinstein, and I was beside myself. I had words coming out of my mouth that I had no idea I could say, and I was upset. We went up to the 8th floor of our office, and I told Frank, "Let's get out of here. You know, may as well go fishing. Let's go down and have a drink. This is all a bunch of bull." We were angry because she released information that was extremely sensitive, and as a result, we find out later from Richard, he threw this stuff over the Golden Gate Bridge that she mentioned.
Wow.
And so, and those were the Avia shoes. So saying, why do you really, other than grandstanding, you know, it certainly had nothing to do with their safety when you release information like that. So we went down to a local establishment in Chinatown, and there we found our captain. And we sat there and we told the captain, we're begging you, you got to do something. You got to get to Sherm. You got to get him to shut the politicians up. So the captain said, all right, I'm out of here. And he left. He left us there, and probably about a half hour, 45 minutes later, he called up and he said, okay, stop drinking, get something to eat, and then get your hips back here. We went back, and Sherm, who had been at some kind of parade they had in Antelope Valley, and so he got back into the Hall of Justice, called for a press conference, and he said he's asking all politicians to stay out of it. You know, one day we had some working evidence, now we had nothing. Right. And we're going to have to start all over again. We were told after the press conference the sheriff wanted us in his office. We went to his office, and he said, well, how did I do, fellas? And I responded, and I told him, you just put smiles back on two detectives that are just bone tired and weary. But because you put the smiles back on our faces, we're ready to go back to work and hit it again tomorrow morning.
Well, and that's just the kind of leadership, you know, guys who are out there putting everything into it. You need to know that you're being backed up like that from HQ.
It was great. You know, we had direct access. You know, he'd because it was such a big case, he demanded briefings, and so he'd get the other managers, executives in there, and we'd be told, you got to go down for briefing. You know, he wants to see him. So we'd go there, and Frank and I mean, there's executives in there. We're standing towards the back. And he said, no. We're the only two guys that really know what's going on. I want you up front. I want to talk to you. And so he made us feel wonderful, and he listened to what we had to say. He wasn't too happy about pulling the guy out of the dental office. He didn't even want to know who made that decision, but he was not happy about it. He was a great boss.
You know, I got to meet Sherm Block. I got to interview him and Lee Baca when Lee Baca was running to become the sheriff of LA County, and you know, I was one of the first ones to report that he had passed away from a subdural hematoma. He was a great guy, and you know, I was sorry to see that happen. I thought he was doing a great job as the sheriff, and I thought you know, he deserved another term. But I guess I want to finish up with you by asking what were, or if there were any long-term effects on you and your family as a result of everything that you've been through, the case. I remember in the documentary when they talked about the Diamond Bar case, you know, that was close to home. It hit close to home, and it affected, you know, your family in that moment. Talk about how this all affected your familia.
My family were scared to death on August the 8th in Diamond Bar. I got called up early in the morning, and about 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock, they called me up to go to Diamond Bar, and I lived in a community right next door, right on the border of Diamond Bar. And my wife said, "Where are you going?" I told her, "Diamond Bar." I jumped in the shower, came back out. She says, "I'm asking you," because I'm one to joke around all the time. And she said, "I asked you, where are you going?" I said, "I told you I'm going to Diamond Bar." And I said, "There's the address." Then we didn't have GPS, Thomas Guide. That's where I'm going. There's the address. And she says, "Whoa," she got out of bed, and I said, "Hey, now that you're awake, maybe not now, but you can go back to sleep, and then you'll get up in a while. About 2 o'clock, I'll bring about 15, 20 people down here and have some lunch." And my wife, who I affectionately refer to as Sister Mary Clarence, she doesn't use profanities, you know. She looked at me and she says, "Bullshit." She says, "You're not going anywhere till we're gone." And my 13-year-old peeked her head around the corner and said, "Mom, should I get brother and sister up?" She says, "Yes, get them up right now." And then my wife didn't go get the suitcases or nothing. She got bags, and I called her the bag lady. Just threw a bunch of stuff in there. She says, "We're going, and we're not coming home until this is over with." Really tough on them. I didn't realize how tough it was until I saw this documentary. But once it was over, we're back home, and there's a joke I used to tell her once a year, we got the wrong guy just to have her move out again for a week. But things have lasted. We just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
Day after Christmas, so we're still there, and we don't think about Richard anymore because he's gone.
Yeah, he is. He died in prison in 2013.
June the 7th, 2013.
Yeah. Well, listen, Gil, thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you for just your honesty, and you're one of the most humble guys I've ever met, and it's been really a privilege to sit here and talk with you about this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. And it's, I'm really, you take this case away, and I'm just another overweight retired cop. You know, that's all I am. It's just never forgot where I came from. And the bottom line through all this, my dream was always to have my dad proud of me. And after watching this, I know he was.
I'm sure he's smiling down, and you know, I hope that my dad is up there with him, and they're having a cerveza and talking about the two Gils down there.
That's right.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Gil Contreras program. I'd like to thank David Cruz from Salem C and all the folks over there. Daniel West, my engineer today, Rodney Miller, and all the folks over here at 870 AM. And I'd really like to thank the folks over at Netflix for letting me spend this time with Gil. And in a little bit, I'm going to do a after show with Gil, so you'll find that on the website also. For now, I'm Gil Contreras. Thanks for listening.